Welcome to the 50/50 Women on Board Seattle Conversation on Board Diversity. I am Sulu Lukoski, co-chair for Seattle, and I'm joined by my co-chair and our moderator for today, Katrina Rock. And we're really delighted to have you here today to discuss leading the way to diverse and gender balanced boards. Before we get started, I wanted to thank the 50/50 Women on Boards team, my co-chair Katrina, and our global sponsors, and our local sponsors. And throughout the program, we really want to encourage you to engage in the chat. And if you have any technical difficulties, please email events@5050wob.com. On today's program, we have an incredible panel, and following the panel, you will transition into your respective breakouts. So to kick off the discussion, I'd like to introduce Betsy Berkheimer-Creder, the CEO of 50/50 Women on Boards, the co-chair of retained executive search firm Berkheimer Clayton, and the author of 2 books, The Board Game and Winning the Board Game. Betsy is going to share 50/50 Women on Boards research on the national and Washington statistics for the progress women have made on Russell 3000 company boards. Betsy, over to you.
Thank you, Sulu. Thank you very much. And good morning, everybody in Seattle. So glad to be with you. I look forward to hearing today's panel, and I think you will learn a lot today. And be sure and stay for our breakout sessions right after the panel, because that's when the panelists are going to be sharing a one-on-one conversation with you and some informal coaching and guidance for your own pursuit of corporate board. So let me share with you where we stand nationwide and in Washington State. Every year, quarterly and annually, but we used to only do it annually, and now we're doing quarterly reporting with our data provided by our partner Equilar to release our Gender Diversity Index key findings, where we analyze the percentage of women on boards nationwide by state and sector. And we also report on the percentage of women selected for new board seats. And based on those who self-identify, we report on the race and ethnicity of all directors. Let's look at the year-over-year progress nationally and in Washington. We're happy to report that nationwide in the U.S., women now hold 25.6 of the Russell 3000 index company boards, which is a 3% increase since last year, and the greatest significant year-over-year increase in the last 5 years. And this is the highest it has ever been, women and men listening today in Seattle. This is the highest it has ever been. So the movement is working, and the message is being followed by companies as well as women pursuing corporate boards. Now on this slide, you'll notice the top bar gives you the number of all board members in the Russell 3000. The red bars are this year, 2021, and the gray bars are last year. So this year, in 2021, we have 27,000 approximately board seats in the Russell 3000, almost average 10 per company. And that's 1,000 seats greater than last year. And that's probably because a lot of companies are adding seats to accommodate and bring on talented women at long last. So the next bar shows you the number of women directors, 6,900 this year versus just 6,000 this time last year. And again, it's a 25.6 total level of the number of women on corporate boards nationwide, higher than ever. So let us go to the next slide about Washington State. We are so proud of Washington, and thank you very much for all of your efforts, because you'll see the bottom bar there says Washington State has now reached 29.5% of all board seats in Washington are held by women. And that's 4 points higher, of course, than the national average. And looking again at the top bar, there are 509 seats held by women in Washington State now, compared to 445 seats last year. And of those, women directors hold 150 seats this year compared to 111 last year in Washington State. And again, emphasizing 29.5 is 5 points higher than where we were in Washington State last year. And as you know, this has a great deal to do with the law in Washington State. You'll hear more about that from Connie a little bit later. But I could also proudly add that you may know that I'm in Los Angeles. That's where our headquarters are. And I've been very much involved in the California effort to increase the numbers of women on corporate boards. And California has also reached 29%. So we're neck and neck with our sister state in Washington. And the two states at 29% are the highest in the country. So that makes you think that, yeah, having a law to increase the number of women on boards does work. Change takes time, and change needs a little bit of help along the way. And that's what these laws have done. And congratulations to Washington State as well. So next slide, back to nationwide. Nationwide company rankings. This is very interesting too, because you would think that there are probably no companies that are gender balanced in the US, but there are. 7% of the companies in the Russell 3000 are already gender balanced. Now that means that women hold half or one more or one less than half in companies that have an odd number of directors. But 7% is pretty good when we didn't think that there would be any, but it's compared to 5% last year. And moving forward, and the next bar down shows that a great increase of the companies that have at least 3 women. That's what we call 3+ in our research. So it's 34% of the companies in nationwide have 3+ women on their boards compared to 26% last year. Significant increase. And then the numbers of companies with 2, 1, or 0 women are decreasing as the numbers of gender balanced and 3+ women are increasing. So pretty pleased about that. Please go to the next slide. Washington company rankings. 7 out of 57 companies that are on the Russell 3000 that are gender balanced. This is in Washington State. 7 of your companies in Washington are gender balanced already. That's 12% of the total number of companies. And it's an increase over last year, which was 10% of the total number of companies. So you are leading the way. California only has 10% of its companies gender balanced. Of course, we have a few more public companies in California than in Washington, but the percentages count and the momentum counts. And the companies, as you'll see on the next bar, in Washington that have increased their numbers of at least 3 women, that's 39%, a significant increase over where the companies were last year at 24%. And you'll see also that obviously the companies with 2 women are decreasing. The 30% 2 women means that they added a woman this year in order to decrease that number from last year's 36%. The companies with 1 woman, kind of even, still 18%, but the ones that have no women are significantly lower in Washington, from 12% last year down to 2% this year. So again, congratulations, Washington. I'm proud of you. We all are, and thank you for helping to lead the way. And then the next slide is to show how many women directors are needed in the state of Washington in order for all of your companies to be gender balanced. 88 women if they replace a man who's already on the board, or 152 women if they are added to the boards, which we certainly do recommend. So that's not too many, don't you think? I think that's achievable in Washington State. At least 88, if not 152, and Washington State could lead the country in gender balanced boards in the not too distant future. Next slide. Lastly, we wanted to share that the situation with minority directors is really very, very low. And we are working on this. One of our goals, besides reaching 50% of all board members being women, we are also encouraging and working toward having 20% of all board members being women of color. And as you can tell, we have a long way to go because men of color hold 7% of the board seats now and women of color 4%. But that's only of the individuals who self-identify. So we encourage all individuals to self-identify. We also encourage all board members and all of you in the audience to utilize our Board Edge Equilar service that includes profiles of directors as well as aspiring directors. And you can see that in the chat right now, boardedgeequilar.com. Very, very useful tool. And even if you're not on a board yet, but you are getting close, definitely go to Board Edge and put your profile on that board. By the way, of the total directors who serve on the Russell 3000, only 17% report their race and ethnicity, and of that, only 12% of directors are people of color, as I mentioned. So encouraging everybody to self-report, and that means the Caucasian board directors should also self-report so that we know the statistics more realistically. Next. This slide is our last slide. It shows the dramatic low levels of women and men of color. To the left are the numbers of women directors on the Russell 3000, and you can see how low that is. And on the right, of course, men directors and how they break down in terms of the racial and ethnic background. So we have a long way to go, everybody, to achieve 20% women of color, but we're working on that as well. Furthermore, at 50/50 Women on Boards, we call for companies to be very proactive in searching for diverse candidates outside of their usual networks. And likewise, men and women in seats of power need to serve as allies and advocate for women outside of their own networks. Now, these results are far from our goal, as I mentioned, and the educational and awareness programs that we do year-round at 50/50 Women on Boards will help. And we hope that this is just the beginning, just the first steps for all of you to be involved in 50/50 Women on Boards. Be sure and consider our Get on Board workshops and our Path to the Boardroom workshops and an array of additional steps that you may take in your pursuit of boards over the next several years. Sometimes it's not immediate. Sometimes it takes years to get on corporate boards, but you're going to hear from our panel all of the secrets, and then each of you will hear individual information in the breakout sessions. So with that, let me say enjoy the rest of the show and turn the microphone over to our moderator, Katrina Rock. And I want to thank Katrina and Sulu and Nicole Hughes all from EY for being great co-chairs this year. And we sure appreciate it. Thanks, Katrina. All yours.
Betsy, thank you so much. It's really great to be here today. I have to take a moment before, well, she's gone, but she's still here with us in spirit. But I do just want to say thank you to Betsy personally and all the work that Women on Boards 50/50 is doing to help advance the movement, and inclusive of all the data that they produce every year that we just went over. So thank you very much, Betsy. And now I'd like to welcome our panel, what everyone's a main event. So right now I'd like to welcome 4 of our panelists. We're going to discuss the steps you can all take to elevate ourselves and others. And I'll introduce these incredible CEO and corporate board directors individually and give each of you a chance to say hello to our audience. So joining us today, we have Jeff Sakaguchi. Jeff is the lead independent director of TrueBlue. He's also a board member for ThinkIQ, American Red Cross for the LA region, and Asyntex. Jeff, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. My honor.
Next, we have Robin Farrakhan, CEO of Farient Advisors. Robin's also the chair of the Wild Aid Board, She's a board member of an organization close to all of our hearts, 50/50 Women on Boards. And she's also a recent board member of Trupanion. Hi, Robin.
Hello. Good to be here.
Great to see you. Next, Veda O'Hara Manager. Veda is the president and CEO of Manager Global Consulting Group. He's also a board member for Valvoline and Helios Education Foundation. Hi, Veda.
Hey, great to be here, Katrina. I'm going to call you K-Rock probably the rest of the session. I just came back from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so I love these J-Lo kind of one mesh names together.
I love it. I love it. And next we have Connie Collinsworth. Hi, Connie. It's great to see you. She's the COO for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also a board member for Banner Corporation and Premera Blue Cross. Hi, Connie.
Hi, Katrina. Happy to be here with my fellow panelists. Look forward to the conversation.
I know we've been getting ready for this panel for quite a bit now, and it's great to finally be here in this moment. I'm going to jump right into some of the questions that were put together I want to talk about today. So, Jeff, I want to start with you. Our theme this year for Women on Boards 50/50 is leading the way to diverse and gender balanced boards. So we really applaud you and what you've been doing with TrueBlue and all of the folks at TrueBlue being invested in this. As a board director yourself, can you share with the audience what practices you've put in place or seeded that are really attracting a diverse board?
Sure, absolutely. Well, again, thanks for the opportunity to speak to everybody here. Congratulations to 50/50 Women on Boards for the progress they've made and continue to make. I think it's a tremendous effort, and look forward and enjoy being part of it year after year and seeing that progress continue. TrueBlue has been recognized for our diversity, and that's not just gender, it's all kinds of diversity of color, of thought, and that's how we really think about it. When we look at our board makeup and the things that we need to do, it's we're skills first. What are the things that we really need on our board to make sure that we function effectively and help guide TrueBlue to be as successful as it is? But within that, we have been I think the key word is intentional, and you'll hear that probably time and time again, about we really seek people who bring diversity, and that's gender, color, other points of view, all the different ways that you think about it. It is CEO-led, and if it's not CEO-led, it ought to be board-led. But we were fortunate enough to have a CEO who really felt that we needed to be more diverse and move away from the white Caucasian male leadership that they had for quite some time. They brought a female director in years ago that sort of paved the way. And we even created a corporate diversity committee almost 10 years ago, sort of before it was really in vogue, but as it was beginning to be in vogue. And we've taken a process that's very structured around our approach to recruiting board members. And again, it's skills first, but we use an outside search firm to help us expand the pool and make sure we are seeing diverse candidates. And we place a premium on, all things equal, we want the best person, but is that person also somebody who brings in a diverse point of view? And that's really the most important thing for us right now. And it's been very successful for us. We are gender balanced. We're also right now people of color balanced among our independent board directors. So pretty proud of our progress there.
If I could just jump in on that, I think what you are saying is really interesting about the whole thing about being intentional. And I was thinking about Trupanion. I was the first woman on their board. They went public in 2014. That's a Seattle-based company, by the way. And we had talked and I was on the Nom and Gov committee. And we had talked for quite a while about how important it was to have females on the board and also some ethnic diversity on the board. And it just made sense because Trupanion is in the pet health insurance business, and most veterinarians where health insurance is distributed, they're female, and the majority are female. The majority of our pet parents are female, who bring pets in for the medical treatments and so on. And so it made a lot of sense. And we had everybody kind of conceptually behind it, the CEO in particular, the board. But it wasn't until we said, we are not hiring on the board, we're not putting anyone else on the board who is either ethnically not diverse or not female. They have to be one or the other in order for us to put anyone else on this board. And it wasn't until that declaration got made to where change really started to happen. At that point, we brought in
a Black man to be on the board who's been terrific. And then we also brought in a female veterinarian. So that was kind of the ultimate in intentionality. We just said no more new board members until, unless they fit these criteria.
Yeah, K-Rock, if I can add to that, I think Jeff and Robin make great points. They talk about it from the candidate perspective. I'll talk about it from if you're already on the board and the govern nom perspective, which they also mentioned. I did something that was intentional on my board is that when we spun Valvoline out from Ashland Chemical, one of the things I did is I intentionally, even when I was at Ashland, intentionally kept showing up to the Gov and Nom committee meetings and eventually was made a member of the committee and then eventually made the chair of the committee when we took Valvoline public. So then that was the intentionality of being sure then that I had some degree of control and say so over the diverse slate of candidates that we would then see for the future. So that's another aspect of intentionality. If you're already on a board, try to get the reins or be present for the Nom and Gov committee so that you're not, once the candidates come before a board, you're not surprised by the slates that are come before you.
I can just re-second that. So at one point in time, there were 15 men and I on the banner board. And it was at the point they asked me to become chair of the governance and nominating committee that I took over, really helping to network, because some of the intention was there, but they didn't have the connections and the network and didn't think broadly about who was, quote, qualified. And now today, Banner, who's one of the proud sponsors of this program, is 41% diverse. There are 4 women, a person, a Black woman, as well as a Hispanic man. But it is a journey that's taken 9 years because you have to have seats open, but then you have to think about the pipeline and what the qualifications are you're looking for. But I would just second everything that has been said before. And it shows, though, that intentionality and thought about what you're bringing to the table and not just check the box. But there are plenty of qualified candidates, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that as part of the conversation.
Yes, definitely. I think, Jeff, something that stuck out for me that you said as well is that, oftentimes we use recruiting firms or board recruiting firms in order to get candidates for those positions. I think, I've run across a lot of people in my career in consulting, of course, that have joined boards through more non-traditional career paths, right? And what was their story, right? Because sometimes those executive recruiting firms don't always find those folks who don't have the traditional C-suite, kind of experience up on their resume. And so, Connie, coming back to what you were saying about networking, are there key strategies or things that you think about when either you mentor folks or that you did for yourself that around networking and being strategic and intentional about that for yourself to get on boards that you could share with our audience?
Yes, I think that networking is just the key to this whole process. And I think it is important that you find the people that are in that position to make the recommendation, to influence the decision, to be your executive sponsor. It is still a fairly closed network of people. It's a small number who actually serve in these seats. And I think you have to start out by telling people you're interested, telling them you're qualified, developing a bio, a resume. It isn't the same as if you're applying for a job. You need to be qualified, but the qualifications aren't exactly the same. The role is different, and you have to understand how that role is different. My very first board seat came as a result of participating in something called Direct Women Institute, which is an organization that was spun out of the American Bar for Women Lawyers back at the time that Urban Outfitters and Twitter went public without women 11 years ago, saying they couldn't find anyone qualified. And the reason was the definition of what's qualified was you had to be a CEO, a sitting or former CEO. And Direct Women said, who spends more time in a boardroom understanding compensation, risk management, governance than lawyers? So we have a group of really talented women who could serve in those roles that are being overlooked. And as a result of attending that institute in New York, I also was invited to go to a special session that was done by the New York Stock Exchange. And they put together this speed dating event, produced a book of people that were women and people of color, and sent them to the chairs of every public company and the chair of the GovNom committee, and said, don't tell us you can't find anyone qualified. Here's a book full of qualified people. My picture was in that book, and at the time, the chair of the GovNom committee for Banner received that book, looked through it, and he had been a client of mine 20 years previous and had seen me do M&A transactions as outside counsel, and was saying, we're getting ready to grow. The bank has done a number of acquisitions since then. They thought that my skill set would be helpful. That is how I came to be on the Banner board. But it took me getting my name out there, my picture in that book, letting people know I was qualified, letting them know I was interested. And I think that is really important. You have to think about what you have to offer a board, what kind of industries you're interested in, think that you can add value to, and then reach out proactively to individuals that you know back through time, or that you can get connections with, to put your name out there on the short list, so those chairs and other board members think of you when the question arises.
No, excellent points. I would say, Connie, the other aspect of networking is certainly one great important side of the coin, and letting people know that you're available and qualified. There's also some great organizations out there, the Hispanic Association for Corporate Responsibility, that also has a great pool of candidates, women on boards, for example, even going back through some of the past speakers and panelists, such as we have here today. The distinguished group would make great board members for, depending upon, again, the competencies that board is looking for, et cetera. There are just a number of different. Savoy Magazine just published just last week, a big volume of 2 volumes, frankly, of African-American board members across the spectrum of companies, sectors, industries, et cetera. So again, being intentional and looking at those different sources in addition to the networking could be beneficial.
Yeah, I'd also add that I think the search firms are beginning to understand that, not all candidates for boards have to have a C attached to their name. In fact, in many cases, there is a lot more interesting and up and coming talent, some of the younger age demographic that may not have reached the C-suite yet, but are still extraordinarily capable board members and bring really interesting insights to the boardroom. So, understanding how to get connected to the sources of board members, as well as those who are sort of channeling board member candidates to the companies, is really important. It isn't like the old days where it was the CEO's friends or a couple board members' friends, and that network was confined to 10 or 15 people at most, and then you bring in your buddy. Those days are long gone. So, really understanding how to get in front of a company, because you're bringing in diversity again, not just of color and gender, but of thought and background and experience, and that's crucially important.
I think it's the story, right, Jeff? As I think about it, it's that it's no longer just about a resume. It's really about how do you tell your own story, right? Of all the things that you've experienced.
And it's also getting the C-suite and the boardroom to understand that there's more to bringing in excellent board candidates than just looking at the traditional retired CEO in my business, retired CEO in my industry. We got to get beyond that.
I think when we talk about branding later, I'd like to come back around to that as well, because when we talk about brand and we relate that to storytelling, those aren't really the things that come across in titles in a resume per se, right? Although you may have experience in real estate contracts or other things that, like compensation committee, items, or human capital now, as we think about, right, beyond the compensation committee itself. And how can you make sure that story is coming through, even if the titles don't necessarily match the traditional, like you said, Jeff, kind of C-suite career advancement levels that you would see? So yeah. Robin, if we come back around to networking and we think about in understanding how important it is to network, I'd love to get key tips around what you think of networking itself, and like, what does that really mean, and how can we give our audience a little bit more of a tactical view of what they can be doing to network? Because everyone says go network, go get a mentor, but like, what does that really mean? And then in addition to that, really, how can we, the folks on this panel, as well as folks are in the audience, can we help businesswomen become more networked and more visible in their careers, just to be considered for board openings? So 2-part question. We can start on whichever side you want.
Yeah. So, I think the conversation we just had leads to this, and everybody does say, well, use your personal networks and, that kind of thing. And we just touched on the whole issue of personal brand, which I think is really important, because, in my business, I do executive compensation consulting. I'm in the boardroom all day, and I touch a lot of different kinds of companies. So I feel like I know a lot of different industries and all. But if I'm out looking for a board seat, the question is, what is my real defining characteristic? And I think one has to be real clear about it. If one networks and says, well, I can do just about anything, that's not going to stick with somebody. But what will stick is, if I was thinking about it. I was a strategy consultant for 5 years, and then have done executive compensation consulting, and now that's turned into more governance consulting. So what I can bring to the boardroom is strategy, compensation, and governance. I mean, I'm really strong in those areas, and it's a key theme. And so if I can get that across, it's important. And I think these defining characteristics, everybody has them. And it's based on, you call it the story, but it's based on how much experience you've had and kind of where your heart is on some of this. And also maybe think about what kind of industries and what kind of companies is important to target, because each board and each kind of company has its culture. And I think one of the things, having been a board member, that's really important to keep in mind is, what is the culture of that board? What is the culture of that company? And how do you fit into it? Because if there's not a fit, then that's kind of an unhappy situation. But if there is a fit, it can be a very happy situation. And I mean, so that's another part of defining what it is you want as you go out and develop and talk with personal networks. And, for me, it's making sure that the board experience is authentic, and then there's good collaboration, but there's also really authentic feedback and participation. So it's not just a yes board; it's a yes and board. It's bringing up really important points that need to be brought up. So I think those are really good. The other thing that I would just say is that for mid-management people who are maybe a little bit younger, not CEOs, one of the things that boards want to make sure people understand is kind of what it takes to be on a board, and what the board process is like, and the collaborative process, which is so important. And I think somebody who can articulate that and make sure, with their networks, and make sure that they can convey an understanding of that, is going to be really important. And then the third thing I'll say is, it's really great to use personal networks, but there's also a lot of what I'll call commercial networks out there now. So Betsy talked about one. There's Athena for women. There's Board Prospects. There's several of them. And I don't think cold calling really works. But these kind of networks, these commercial networks, are more than cold calling, because they really put your profile up in front of people, and you may find cross connections, almost like, LinkedIn. Here's someone who knows someone who knows somebody. So 2 or 3 degrees of separation can also help and be very, very effective in terms of using your networks. It's not just who you know directly, but also the network. So I think those are all kind of really good tips that take it beyond just use your network in terms of what works and what doesn't, because I think you have to strategically use that network and think hard about that as you begin the process.
So I would just reaffirm what Robin said. Boards start out by saying, we have a matrix. We need someone who's got audit experience. The new thing is having someone with IT or fintech or digital. We need somebody who understands comp or human capital. And so they do start out wanting to fill out that block as part of their narrative, and then look for people who understand their industry. So as you go out, saying what it is that you bring extra to fill that slot is going to be important, versus saying I'd just be a great board member because I'm strategic, as an example. And it can be challenging at times. My challenge today, candidly, is I'm viewed as warm and fuzzy philanthropy instead of understanding how complex the work of the Gates Foundation can be in my role in governance. A new box that I think I checked maybe that never existed before is called ESG. And people are trying to figure out, what is ESG? I predict pretty soon there will be an ESG box. And maybe I'll have a unique position in that. But it isn't a box that most people have. They're looking for often skill sets, and that's a form of diversity that I think Jeff was really talking about. And there's another new form of diversity, which is diversity of age. The millennials have a whole different attitude about the workforce. And if you're all retired and playing golf, you might not be completely in touch with the work from home and the great resignation. And so I think that's the beauty of the new opening of the door about the different perspectives that will make boards stronger in giving guidance to management, which is what the role of the board really is. It's not to run the company, it's to bring an outside perspective, make sure those right questions are asked. But you do start out with a narrow kind of pitch as part of what it is that you bring in extra expertise, because otherwise they've got a lot of expertise in the management. And it's what do you add value as part of your narrative in your networking conversations?
Yeah, Connie makes a great point. And I know, K-Rock, you want to talk a little bit later about the value add expertise and about how boards look at companies. And I just finished a competencies grid that Connie just talked about as we're looking at our board. For example, Valvoline is a company that makes a lot of money at oil changes. Well, of course, the world is changing. We will not need oil changes perhaps in 15 to 20 years. So we are beginning to think about we have been thinking about what kind of new board members we need, for example, in the electric vehicle space or the new mobility space. Those are the kinds of conversations we're having. So we do have a box for that. But I'm also seeing a fair amount of, shall we say, elasticity around what board members are needed. Certainly, I would say probably the most rigid box, if you will, is financial expertise for audit committee, or the one that is there's not a lot of elasticity there. You need financial experts, you need individuals that understand that from the audit world, et cetera. EY is our auditor, for example, by the way, and we're pleased to have them. The other piece of that is, though, having different world experiences and different experience in different sectors can also be beneficial. ESG, as Connie just mentioned, understanding the environmental and the social and the governance side is extremely important. I'm probably one of the most unconventional board members that you find. I'm sure when I landed on the board, my colleagues were saying, how did this guy get here? But frankly, I was one of the only people that had global sourcing experience, had been to Vietnam, had been to China, had been to Indonesia, and brought pretty good expertise around supply chains or solving issues. I had M&A expertise, which they had as well, but maybe in a narrow sector of chemicals. So highlighting those kind of expertises as to how you add value there. But I am beginning to see non-C-suite, more elasticity in what kind of board members we're willing to look at, more so than before.
Yeah, I would just say that, I think companies are increasingly getting better at the old adage of skate to where the puck's going to be, not to where it used to be, and trying to figure out what skills are going to be needed. A board member, when you bring somebody on, that's a pretty long-term commitment. It can, it's not something that you're a year and done. You're really hoping that somebody can add value and really provide good governance and leadership for 10 plus years in an ideal world. And so really making sure that, you're kind of, I hate to use the word future proofing, it's really future enabling a company's performance and getting those right skills, on board now, so that as the company grows and evolves, the board and the management team can continue to grow and evolve. I think those are really crucial decisions that boards make when they're going through the whole recruiting process.
Yeah, to that point, I think looking at where things are going, one can see cyber being really important. It depends on the company again, but one can see cyber being really important. One can see ESG being really important. Global, as you mentioned, Vada, can be really important. And I feel as though if you look at kind of what the other one is digital marketing, things of that nature. So if you look at where things are going, that's something that boards are really interested in. Having said that, though, the tried and true things, how do you compensate people? It's always a perennial favorite, and not that easy. You're dealing with the emotional space. So again, I wouldn't necessarily say we have expertise when we don't. Obviously, we don't do that, but we do want to make sure we're mindful of kind of what kind of where you can add experience, because it is changing. It's not the same as it used to be.
And you want to also look ahead toward new markets you may want to be getting into for the future.
Yep.
So that's another aspect of things. It's not just about what your company looks like today, but also what your company may look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, or new markets. Clearly, that's an area that we have to look at as well, given the fact that a majority of our revenue comes from an area that's changing and evolving so fast. Blockchain technology is another area where I think I just heard on the radio driving in that a city is going to begin a blockchain experiment where they're going to do a vote just as a test experiment on blockchain. So it's a very fast evolving environment with lots of new expertises out there that could be very, very beneficial.
And Veda, to build on that a little bit, as you think about what you would recommend to our audience that they consider to round out their experience to be more in demand for these board positions, we've got a lot of, you guys have mentioned a lot of great things, Robin, defining characteristics. We want to be future enabling. We want to be cross-connected, going back to intentionality. I think also the culture of the board, it's not just, do they want me? It's, do I want to be on that board, right? Do I believe in that? And so as you tell, Veda, if you could kind of share with us as folks think about how to tell their story and how to put forward their defining characteristics, how would you give advice around making sure that that's a well-rounded approach? Are there things they can be doing, ways that they can shore up some of those skills? Or is it just take your travel experiences, for instance, and all the things you did that maybe wouldn't have been on the resume and put those into the story? Just give us some advice there.
Yeah, certainly be happy to. Just quickly, I would say, Connie, give the exact advice that I give to board aspirants when they come to me to ask about board positions or what was my journey to the board. And the first thing we really just start is taking some time in a quiet moment, a couple hours, and just trying to figure out a board bio, a board biography, which is very different again than all the things you did since college on your resume or the jobs that you've had. There are very specific metrics in terms of how was the organization when you arrived, what value did you add when you were there, what financial metrics, for example, what changed and how did you make it better? Or were there significant initiatives, for example, that you contributed to that helped? Was there significant M&A? So thinking about all the board categories in terms of the competency grids that we've talked about, such as compensation or HR, and that's another area now because the war for talent or the competition for talent, if you will, is so great. You're beginning to see a lot more HR professionals migrate to boards than you've ever had before in the past. So the board bio, I think, is the start. This also kind of sparks the discussion, I would say, about generalists versus specialists. As I said earlier, specialists are important clearly in certain areas, compensation, as Robin mentioned, financial expert. I think specialists, you certainly need one there. There are other areas, though, do you want people to have multiple experiences in? If you're in a regulated industry like financial or banks or utilities, you probably want someone that has crisis, regulatory, and that kind of expertise on the board. So really think about developing your story both from a macro point of view, but also even put a list of 5 or 6 companies that you aspire that you like to be on the board for and see how your expertise matches up with that company and how you can tell your story and tailor that story using LinkedIn and using other networks, how you can get in front of that company when that next opportunity comes about. Even reading proxies about when the next retirements are going to take place is even just a great way. And then lastly, I would say, K-Rock, is invest in yourself. Organizations like National Association of Corporate Directors, some of the organizations like Board Prospects, other things, lots of organizations now are also doing things such as board aspirant training, for example, that help organizations, people of color, women, others, to get ready for boards and to give them kind of the branding training, the expertise training, so that when those opportunities come out and they come together with these books and that they present to Gov and NOM chairs and others to say, all right, we've got individuals that are ready for boards here. So there's a number of different approaches, but I think those are some of the most important things I would advise to people to do. But really invest in yourself. It's amazing at NACD, for example, when the official plenary sessions are over or the sub-sessions are over, how much time and how much you can learn sitting down with the Gov and NOM chair over a ginger ale at the hotel bar and learning more about that company and getting to know them, which might result in a board seat. My board seat actually came as a result of a unsuccessful board transaction or a successful financial transaction from someone who wanted to do something in Nike. It wasn't quite compatible for Nike to do, but I say to people, you never know who's watching. I didn't have a relationship with this person. The transaction didn't happen, but they were so impressed by the way we put together the presentation, the people that were around the table 3 weeks later, I got a call saying, I'm retiring from a board, but I'm going to recommend you to take my seat on this board because I was so impressed about how this happened. So always be prepared. You never know who's watching and how that opportunity could take place. I'll turn the mic back over to you.
But Vada, let me follow through with my second example of how I got on the Premier board, because it fits exactly with what you were saying, which is I went through the list 10 years ago of companies that I thought were viewed as blue chip boards to see who I knew and to see what I could offer. And in that case, the benefit that I thought I could offer was the regulatory and compliance with my background, and reached out to the general counsel, who'd been a former partner of mine when I was at the K&L Gates firm, and reached out, simply said, if an opportunity comes along, I'd like you to think of me, not with Premera, but generally. And it was about 6 months later, he said, hey, I've got a great idea. How about I submit your name for the Premera board? Because you don't walk in and say to somebody, I want to be on your board. That's still not quite the way the game works. But planting that seed was quite intentional on my part, exactly doing the kind of research that you talked about, targeting that, thinking who I knew, telling the story, and planting the idea. I don't know that if it would have played out that way if I hadn't been proactive in that fashion, and have now served on that board for 9 years. My term limits come up this spring, and it's been a fantastic experience. But it's another practical example of how you put this in real terms, as far as it works sometimes, but you have to be patient as well.
Yeah, you're playing the long game there. One of the things that I have found interesting as well is when you're talking to people, seeing an opportunity, somebody's on a board, you're learning about it, just asking really good questions is good. And I would just caution us not to assume that a company whose business is X, they're going to want that on the board. Sometimes they think the management has it. They need someone to oversee it, but they don't need someone to do it because that's a different role. And so it's really important to understand, what do they want on the board, because it's not always what you might think.
Yeah, it is an important distinction. You're never replacing their general counsel, for example. You're bringing a different perspective.
Right.
And I think that brings up an interesting point too. I know we have varying levels of career folks in our audience. I'm sure there are some folks in the audience who don't actually even know what a board requires, right? Like, what are the roles on the board? What are the committees on the board? And what do those committees do? And so, shameless plug for Women on Boards 50/50. There are a lot of workshops, if you care to get engaged there, in some workshops to figure out what your branding statement would be, or what boards actually do, and what the roles are on those boards that you could contribute to as your starting point. That I've attended a few of those, and they're really informative. So just as an FYI.
Yeah, no, K-Rock, I would say as well, don't think you're going to leap right from either a certain position in a company straight to the Procter & Gamble board, for example. There are a lot of private equity, with some things we overlook many times. There are a lot of private equity boards, portfolio companies within private equity. Some private equity firms hold 100, 200 firms. Now, many of those are occupied by the partners of the firm, but many of them now, for governance reasons, and also their goal is to grow that company in 3 to 5 year period and sell it to maximize their return, do look for great independent directors. And that's a great training ground for lots of individuals who, without all the scrutiny of the SEC and the public retrading or the quarterly results, a great way to get training ground for boards and continue your board career. So don't overlook private equity if you're in that financial zone, or you just have expertise in a certain sector in which private equity is engaged in.
Yeah, I would also like to give a plug, in addition to the workshops that are done by 50/50 Women on Boards. How I met Betsy in the first place is she and I have both been lecturers at the UW's program that they have for executives, Women on Boards, which is offered quarterly. And then there's another local program called Onboarding, which is great. There's getting to be more and more of these that help you write your resumes, that help you understand how boards function, that get you thinking about what you need to do with respect to your career. So there's a lot of ways, I think, that you can get this training now that didn't used to be available.
I think it goes back to too, Veda, just the word elasticity earlier. I wrote that down as another note. There have been a lot of key nuggets here from you guys that I'm going to use as I go forward in my own talk track. Elasticity and what that means and how you can go out and be doing things for yourself to think about different types of boards. I mean, I can't believe P&G wouldn't want me tomorrow, obviously, but that's a great point, Veda. It's just, again, thinking about all of these things as they work for you and then investing in yourself, right? So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
the stark
Robin,
reality is if you look at the Fortune 1000 and you say, okay, let's the average of, make the math easy, 10 members, 10 board members per company, even though some of them are higher, a couple of them are probably lower, but that's 10,000 seats potentially. Many of them are occupied by the same person on multiple boards, all of the people on this panel. And, when you think about those numbers compared to all of the other people who are in management positions, seeking board positions, the numbers game is pretty awful. So being recognized, having the right kinds of experiences, a lot of it's serendipity, but a lot of it really is, as everybody on the panel has been talking about, this, networking, this continuing education of your own skill set and creating and developing and building your own brand. If you do it solely to go pursue a board seat, you may be disappointed. But if you do it because you're enhancing your own skill set, often that board seat comes along when you least expect it. And it's because you've stayed in touch with people. It's because you remain engaged in other areas of working, in other areas of skill building, and other areas of your own self-education that make you valuable. So continue to think about that throughout your career development, whether you're early in your career or even if you're late in your career.
Yeah, and nonprofit boards are also a great way. Many of them, particularly the branded ones, shall we say, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, Girl Scouts, they try to adopt GAP and really kind of corporate standards with regard to how they govern themselves. They're, the cookie business in the Girl Scouts is a big business. So they try to run things very professionally, but who sits on the local Boys and Girls Club board? Usually the CEO of the utility or the chairman of another entity, and they get to know you. Also in your own career capacity right now, are you, through your manager or through your director, or just by virtue of your job expertise, are you getting a chance to get exposure before the board to present your portfolio of what you do? Another great way to get exposure for your own potential board work, et cetera. I was at Nike 3 weeks, and just by virtue of some of the issues we were facing on Asian sourcing issues, I was before the board 3 weeks after being at the company. Again, that was more serendipitous and just driven by issues and need, but it did say to me, and I often ask the question now, who else are we not seeing on this succession chart that should be before the board to present what they're doing and why this is important to the company's success? So try to ask the question, or if you're not the one presenting, try to tag along with your boss to see what they're presenting to the board so that you can be accustomed to and prepare yourself for that opportunity.
I think the layers of networking too are really important. So even today, right, for the folks in the audience attending this session, a giant proponent of these sessions that we've done across the country, including networking session after this panel, right, where folks, you'll get to meet in a smaller group and with your director coach, make connections, right? And so some of those connections aren't necessarily for people who will put you on a board, but they might just be people who you can then use and be a part of your network to bounce ideas off of, like, hey, is this right? I think I'm going to tell my story this way. Like, what do you think? And how can I really like round this out and make it compelling or more compelling even? And so, it's just opportunities like this and taking full advantage of them. Thank you. I want to advance. And again, thank you guys so much for sharing your insights on all of these things. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So if we transition over around to the company lens, Robin and Jeff, I'd love to have maybe Robin, you start, and Jeff, you add color commentary to the strategies you've put in place to encourage your company's women executives and leadership to seek those corporate board positions. Just what are your thoughts there and things that you've seen, successful strategies and programs?
So what you're talking about is if we have very capable people, at various levels in our company, and we want to encourage them to go on boards to get broader experience. And how does that get done? And I think there's a couple of really good routes for it. One is just the development plan for people. I mean, I have seen some very effective development plans, talent management plans for people that said this person should be on a board. That would round out their experience really well, and it's part of their development plan is to basically suggest that to them, and to be clear about the kind of skills and experience that they'll get, because it is a rounding experience that's really good. So then the next question is, how does the company help with that? And I think there's a few things that I've seen. One is for people at the top to be on look out and to use their networks to say, this is a really positive executive. This is a really good executive, and we'd like them to be on other boards. Do you know of anybody? And so you network at that level. The other thing is, to help those people, do all the things we're talking about here, build the network, the sponsorships and so on. But actually helping to sponsor people and put it as part of the development plan, I have seen to be two of the most effective techniques out there.
Yeah, definitely echo the development plan. At TrueBlue, we're fortunate on one hand to have a number of women who have risen to the executive ranks. In fact, one of the top executives at the company is a woman, and we've got several positions filled by women. It's been a process. And I'd say that, we're also fortunate they're mostly young and they're earlier in their careers, and, probably not yet for a board seat, where they're sort of too busy with the agendas they've got in front of them right now. But it is part of their development plan, and we encourage them to join roundtables, within either their discipline or within their level. We encourage them to kind of continue to have that mentoring relationship or mentor relationship with board members or people from other companies as well. So building those connections, helping sort of bridge nodes in the network, if you will. And, I think all of them, all of the women we are promoting, as well as many of the men we're promoting, we're trying to help position them to be much, much more effective leaders, and eventually, whether it's a board membership or an executive position in another company, it's all part of that development and succession planning. And just like board recruiting, you need to be intentional about that too.
The one other thing that strikes me is that a policy review of a company is probably a good idea. Some companies have policies not to allow people to sit on other boards. And so that may not be the best thing if this is going to be part of a development plan, obviously. And so reviewing those policies, I think, is helpful. And then maybe having a policy around how many. I mean, you can go crazy. And I think the reason people say no other boards is, it's going to take up some of their time. So trying to allow for the fact that they might have a board meeting and to allow for that time is important. And then to have, obviously, policies around no conflict. You obviously don't want somebody sitting on a competitor's board. Not that would happen, but you've got to make sure that the policies are in place. So I think a policy review is another good strategy here.
Yeah, when I was at Nike, Robin, initially they had a policy that no other boards. They obviously wanted you focused on the fundamentals of running the business and not distracted at all. I think there was one other individual who got a special dispensation, but it was a design dispensation to be on the Herman Miller board, and he was a design executive at Nike. They liberalized that policy, and I think in some ways the marketplace takes care of that, because if you are competing with top talent out there, top talent in the interview process is going to ask, am I allowed to sit on another board, or is that something I can do in the future? If you say no, they may think about another company, not coming to your company. So I agree with you. A lot of companies have divested of such, shall we say, draconian policies in that sense.
And I would just say personally, I think it's been the best professional development I could have ever done. There's no way I could have learned firsthand about dealing with cybersecurity after a breach like I did by sitting on the board of Premera Blue Cross. And I took every lesson that I learned from that straight back to my day job. I think you have to balance it. I think you have to be careful. And I spend a lot of my weekends on board work, but I love it. That's why. And you have to make sure you have permission from your CEO. But sitting at that board table with other smart executives is one of the best ways to learn, to make decisions, to make sure you're asking the right questions. And so I think I have been very proactive in supporting the people that work for me, looking at those opportunities, whether it's on their alma mater board, a nonprofit board, a co-op board. You don't start out saying public company board, here I come. And I think that there's lots of ways that you can gain professional development and then maybe not do some of the other things you were planning to do. You have to balance and be responsible with your day job. But I put my professional development in that category versus other types of conferences. And I think you can find that you can balance it if you've got a great team, which allows me to delegate even more, which is another way to bring up more people that are prepared. So I think you're right about the policies, and I think you have to think the long game. Basically, if you want those people to be executives, exposing them to executives is a good way to prepare them.
Yeah, I think on the
Connie,
news.
Sorry, go ahead, Vita.
Oh, good. I was just going to say, on the news you can use front, I think the last statistic I saw was it's about 230 hours a year, roughly. That's probably conservative to be a board member to do a board seat. Other panelists here might have another view, but that's just one board seat. And I do find myself as a chair doing a lot more outreach and a lot more work. So again, that's a pretty conservative number. But if the audience was wondering how much time is going to be required to commit, I think I've seen about 230 hours as the average.
Yeah, it's a lot of weekend and evenings, and obviously they meet during the days as well. But there's a lot of homework. It's not just showing up 4 times a year. So understand what you're committing to.
Which I think comes right back around to make sure that it's a board you're passionate about. Make sure, Robin, right, you used the word authentic a couple of times. Like, make sure that the place you want to go and the companies you put on your list are something that you're willing to and want to invest that extra time for to help shape. So, well, our hour flew by. This has been a very insightful discussion. I really thank you all for being with us today. Look forward to continuing these discussions in our smaller group networking right after we close the panel here. But just as we wrap, I would love to go round robin to each of you. And if you could leave our audience with one key takeaway for today, it would be great to hear from each of you before we go. So Vito, why don't you go first?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's been a great panel, great discussion. I would say intentionality is probably the word of the day. If we were in the Pee Wee Herman show, things would be flying around and et cetera, for those of you of that era and old enough to remember that. But intentionality, I would say, is it. And I know I know you want to talk a little bit about regulatory as well. There are regulatory things that are occurring now that are encouraging, and Betsy talked about them, about encouraging more women on board. I think a combination of the regulatory as well as the marketplace driving this is really helping to drive the change that we're seeing. Goldman Sachs, for example, not taking a company public unless they have a diverse board. Adena Friedman at NASDAQ saying the same with regard to diverse boards. I think those are all positive developments.
Awesome. Jeff?
I'd say this is an absolutely great time to be a woman and to be a person of color in terms of getting on a board, because there's never been a point in business history in the United States or globally where this focus on diversity for the right reasons has really taken hold. And so bringing your skill set and bringing your personal story into the boardroom where you have that opportunity, I think you can make a lot of great progress. And I think the future of business in that regard is going to be bright.
Great point. Robin?
Yeah, I had kind of 2 thoughts. One is proactivity. It gets a little bit to intentionality, but I think about proactivity both on the part of the corporation and on the part of the person who might be looking for a board. It takes proactivity on both parts, and so it's having intention, but then actually doing things, going about and doing things. And then I would say the other thing is, it's easy for people to get discouraged. It's easy to think that if you don't have immediate results, that something's wrong. I mean, it's a long game. And I think, Connie, you brought it up. Somebody brought it up here. But you learn as you move along, and to keep putting one foot in front of the other and recognize you've got a long game, I think is an important point.
Yeah, Connie. Thank you, Robin.
I would second everything that was said. The other thing that makes it really a unique time is that there are, in many cases, age limits, and there are a fair number of existing directors hitting those age limits. When those seats open, these other pressures, whether it be BlackRock or the other institutional shareholders saying, I won't vote for the GovNom chair if you don't have a diverse set of people on your board, the NASDAQ rule, the Washington law, all those things are making boards proactively scramble. The disclosure rules for the SEC, all of those things have changed the game a lot right now. But I would go back to my two examples. The two people that were the people that suggested me for the boards were people I had not worked with for 20 years. Look back in your history. That's where your contacts may come from as much as anywhere else. You never know. And you just, every day you're making connections, and I think you do have to be patient, but proactive is what I would say.
Fantastic. Well, panel, thank you so much for being here today. Looking forward to seeing some of you in our small groups as our coaches. Thank you very much, and we'll transition over to our networking groups as you exit stage left. I'll welcome back my co-chair, Sulu.
Thanks so much, Katrina. And I really want to thank all of you in the audience for joining our discussion today. Katrina mentioned it. There are lots of resources, that are available, both from what our panelists shared today. Additionally, if you're a woman in your mid to senior level career looking to pursue a board position, I want to highlight that 50/50 Women on Boards has 2 courses remaining in December. One is Path to the Boardroom, and that's on December 14th, and then Get on Board, which is a workshop the week of December 6th. Links to both of those are available in the chat. We also encourage you to participate in the new educational programs, conversations, events, and even more networking opportunities that are launching in 2022. So as Katrina mentioned, it's now time for us to transition to our breakout sessions. I'm super excited for these. You can access your breakout room if you look over to the left side of your screen and click on Agenda. On your agenda, you will see your breakout room. All you have to do is click into the session and then click the Join Now button. This is how you access the link to your Zoom breakout room. If you have any issues accessing the breakout room, you can go to the Help Center, which is also located to the left of your screen, or you can again email events@5050wob.com, and someone will reach out to you immediately. We really look forward to continuing this conversation and hope to see you at one of our remaining city state events. And with that, look forward to seeing you in the breakout.
Thank you. Thanks, Sulu.
Thanks, of course. See you on the flip side.
Sounds great.
All right.